Welcome to the Stratix podcast, where we talk about mobile technology in business, education, and healthcare. Whether it's new trends, new products, or better ways to do things, our goal is to give you useful information that'll make your organization better. Today, we're talking about AI at the edge, when data is sensitive, privacy and security on mobile devices. Here's your host, Stratix Chief Strategy and Solutions Officer, Alex Kalish.
All right, welcome back to AI at the Edge here. I'm Alex Kalish. I'm the Chief Strategy and Solutions Officer at Stratix Corporation, and this is our third episode of AI at the Edge, where we try to get really practical about how enterprises actually operationalize AI, particularly at the edge, where, as you know, all the work happens. And one of the main themes I think enterprises wrestle with right now is not whether to use AI, but like where it's safe to let AI actually run. So that question is super relevant for us today when you're talking about a device in an employee's hand, because that device can see a lot of different things. It can see customer data, it can see patient records, it can see pricing, inventory, to name a few. And then you've got personal versus professional data mixed in there as well. So today's topic, when data is sensitive, handling private, secure AI on mobile devices is really relevant to that. And I've got two guests who have been probably thinking about this a lot more than I have and a lot longer and deeper than most. Joining me from Google, Ian Marsanyi, a product lead at Pixel for Business, and Sean Ginevan, head of global technology partnerships for Android Enterprise. Ian, Sean, thank you both for being here. Welcome.
Thanks for having us.
Maybe before we dig in, maybe just a quick word from each of you guys on what you're focused on right now. Ian, why don't you kick us off, give folks a sense of just what's on your plate for Pixel for Business, what you're doing.
Sure. Thanks, Alex. And thanks again for having us. Super exciting times over in Pixel. We've got I/O coming up with lots of great announcements for Android. The Android show just landed, I think, just before our recording here. So lots of great updates with respect to Gemini intelligence, and it'll be really exciting to see how all those come to life on Pixel. I think for the Pixel team, we're really focused from a B2B perspective, how we realize the vision of all of these incredible AI features for business customers and make them really tangible and impactful for our business users. On the consumer side, there's fewer hurdles. It's a lot easier to experiment and play around. Obviously, things change when we bring those features into a business context. So we're laser focused on making sure we have the right tools and the right framework to bring those capabilities to our business customers.
That's great. Thank you for that. Sean, same to you. Android Enterprise covers a lot of ground. What's the lens that you're bringing to the table today?
Yeah, I think, we're really excited about the expansion of Android, as a compute platform across screens. We just recently had the launch of Android XR, bringing Android into that extended reality space, starting with, Galaxy XR and headsets, and more form factors that we'll be talking about at I/O. About a week after this recording. We're also obviously excited about all the things that Gemini is bringing to the table and all the work we're doing around bringing a contextual intelligence that's more helpful, that can work across screens, provide that continuity, and really kind of, reinvent the way people think about computing. I've been in mobile for quite a while now, and I think this AI wave is the first time, that I have seen folks really rethinking fundamentally how workflow, how business, how technology integration is going to happen since, the kind of launch of iPhone many, many years ago, and then the launch of Android certainly shortly after that. And so we're really excited about how we go through and bring these experiences across screens, not just to phones and tablets, but new glasses, new headsets. We just announced Google Books at the Android show, so we're now investing in laptops as well at a common platform. Lots of exciting things happening on the Android side.
Yeah, sounds like it. Well, super glad that both of you are here. So maybe let's dive in, and I can try to frame up the conversation here before we start. So I think there's this tempting narrative out there that says, AI is everywhere right now, and all I have to do is just turn it on and I'll be fine. And I think both of you know it's not that simple, especially on mobile, where the context is shifting every few seconds, where data sensitivity changes by the minute, and where the device itself is constantly shifting between personal and professional use constantly. So we're going to walk through a handful of topics that I think are top of mind for a lot of folks, but maybe let's start with this fundamental architectural question, which is where should AI actually run? And when enterprises are thinking about AI on mobile, there's a consideration of on-device or cloud, like it's some binary decision, but in practice, it's not always going to be one or the other. The question is more about the seam between the two. So I want to start there. Maybe in your perspective, how should leaders really be deciding what runs where and what's the right and wrong way to make that decision?
Yeah, I don't think there's really one answer, Alex. I think, we really see hybrid AI, so a mix of on-device and cloud really winning the day. And a lot of those decisions come around things like context and complexity. On the context side of things, there may be on-device workflows that you want to drive simply because of where that data lives. If I'm going through and working with a photo as an example, and I want to say, analyze all my photos and, send the cutest cat to mom, you may not have all of your photos backed up. You may want to run that workload on the device to be able to go through and, work with the data that's locally. Also, if I'm going through and handling things that are high frequency, low latency, things like auto reply and a messaging or a ticketing application for field services, routing all of that data constantly back to the cloud every single time just gets transactionally expensive and adds a lot of latency and reduces kind of, the immediacy that a user expects in that more real-time type of application. Likewise, on the cloud, when we're going through and saying, hey, I want to go and summarize vast amounts of information, or, I want to work across multiple data repositories at once to come up with an answer. Maybe I'm working on, a complex piece of machinery and I need to look at both service manuals, but also prior tickets at the same time. Your device is neither going to have the resourcing available to analyze all that data at once, nor is it going to necessarily have that data available even on the device itself. And so a cloud workload may work a lot better. And so, one of the things that we see at Google as an advantage is this idea that we bring a vertically integrated platform. We bring silicon on the device that can handle AI workloads. We bring silicon in the cloud that can handle AI workloads. We bring a mix of different large language models that can be, running on the device locally, but also running in the cloud. And organizations can pick and choose the right sets of developer tooling to go and address the particular workflow that they're trying to achieve, and ultimately the business goal that they're trying to achieve as well. And so ultimately, I think to answer your question directly, where should it live? Where should the, business decision makers and architects think about this? There isn't a right answer. And I think organizations need to think about the problem they're trying to solve and then pick the right tools to go and solve it.
I think another way of looking at that is maybe to say that there may not be one right answer, or maybe the right answer is everywhere, right? I think one way to look at this problem is, instead of thinking of where to deploy my AI, it's how am I using AI in my existing use cases, or how can I use AI in my existing use cases to uplevel those use cases or the way that I'm accomplishing them. Sean mentioned the full stack capabilities we have at Google. It makes it really exciting from a product perspective when we're thinking about how to solve problems for users, because effectively we're able to utilize AI in any part of that stack in the most effective way possible for the use case. And I think businesses can take that same approach to figuring out how to solve their problems as well, right? With the tool set that's been exposed on Pixel or on Android, both from a developer perspective, but also from a feature perspective. Just to highlight and echo some of Sean's points as well, I think the way that you dissect those use cases and figure out the right tooling, what are the data inputs? If you're working with RCS messages or live phone call data and stuff that's inherent to your phone, is the server round trip really adding value? Or are you just introducing latency and cost where that data already lives on your phone? And so the output is going to also live on your phone. That's the second data point too, is where are you actually taking the insights that AI is deriving and injecting them into your workflow? Are you responding back to RCS messages with data that's already on your device? For example, with the Magic Queue feature, right? We don't need a server round trip to fetch calendar information to then auto suggest in a reply exactly when you're going to be at your next meeting. But if the phone is a presentation layer, if it's an application that's showing cloud-backed information, right? If we're using Gemini in Gmail, we're not going to use local processing and locally cached versions of your messages to produce a suggested message in Gmail. All of that data already lives in the cloud. The application is the presentation layer for a cloud backend. In that case, the server workload makes a ton of sense. So I think just expanding on Sean's approach here, I think we can really mirror the way that we design these features here at Google and thinking very concretely about what is the use case, what are the data inputs, and what are the expected outputs that we're looking for to then map back, hey, which tool in our tool set is the right one for this particular use case. And then you can throw in the dimensions of availability and latency, and you can consider the data governance. But ultimately, all of that comes together. You should be able to have the same sort of expectations around data privacy and governance, regardless of what part of the stack you're utilizing.
Yeah, that certainly tracks with a lot of what we see on our side. I mean, especially with these, Stratix deals a lot with frontline workers. So the use cases where on device makes the most sense can be ones where latency is a constraint, or there's connectivity considerations like field services, retail, logistics, healthcare at the bedside, places where data is local, and that decision may need to be local as well. So that's a great intro. Maybe we segue a little bit into governance, because I think this might be an area where I see one of the biggest gaps between what enterprises think they may have under control and what's actually happening on the ground. And obviously, as I think we all know, AI adoption is moving super fast. Governance frameworks don't always keep up with the same pace. So where are you guys seeing that gap and governance struggling to keep up, and why is that important? Why does that matter?
Yeah, I think the challenge is that we are seeing certainly organizations try to get a handle on governance, but at the same time, they're also trying to move really quickly. And in some cases, that's leading to actions and outcomes that aren't necessarily great for the business. So there was a recent pulse survey from Ernst & Young, from EY, and they said, 70% of organizations are using a centralized ops model to manage it for AI approval, set guardrails. I think all that's goodness. I think the challenge is, there are a lot of organizations are also telling users, move as quickly as you can and start applying AI into the organization. And that's because, users may not be aware of the guardrails that are being set, or are, facing pressure to circumvent some of those guardrails. We're seeing cases where, in that same survey, 45% of technology executives believe that their organization experienced a confirmed or a suspected leak of sensitive data because employees are using unauthorized tools. 39% said that they confirmed or suspected a leak of confidential intellectual property from the organization. And so I think the thing that we see is that, a lot of people may be bringing a tool of choice, from their personal lives, and they're bringing that to work. And that might be okay. Like, you may want to go through and plan a birthday party for a friend, and you should use whatever AI tool you're most comfortable with. I am particularly partial to Google Search and Gemini, but there may be something that you're using instead in your personal life. But that's not the type of tool, that makes sense for you to be analyzing, customer records, healthcare records, other data that is confidential to the organization. And I think this idea of shadow AI, is mirroring a lot of the things we saw in the consumerization of IT 10 years ago, with the idea of shadow IT in general. A lot of folks wanted to synchronize data across devices. And so they were bringing, file sync and share tools and using those temporarily to go and, migrate data from device to device. I think the challenge with a lot of the consumer AI tools that are out there is, unlike a file share tool where you put the data and maybe you can claw it back, it's really sort of unclear how you do that inside of a generative AI tool, and whether or not that data that you've now thrown into a tool outside of your control, is going to use the data for training or not. And so what we certainly have been doing here in Android and with the folks over at Pixel is really looking to tie the kind of first class consumer experiences of Android back to an enterprise governance model. So if you're signed in with a Google Workspace account on, into the Gemini app as an example, or if that device is only used for work, even some of the embedded features like the assistant features become governed by those workspace terms of service. That ends up being really, really important, right? You're giving people the tools they need to do the work they want to do with the experience they're demanding, but you're making sure you're doing it in a way that you're guaranteed that the data is still remaining inside of your control.
And maybe just to add there, I mean, I think this is where sort of the classic device management considerations come back into play, because at the end of the day, access to these services is just like any other service that you deploy onto your managed devices. So you can use the sort of conventional device management capabilities to restrict enterprise data access, but of course you need to also make available those capabilities so that you're not, encouraging shadow IT in non-work scenarios. The other dimension then is the built-in device capabilities that are also providing those like magical AI experiences. I think that's a dimension where IT decision makers do need to have awareness of what is possible on their device as an independent dimension from the services that they bring to the device as well. Certainly when we're thinking from a Pixel and an Android lens, we're very laser focused on making sure those built-in device experiences have the same enterprise data protections and the same sort of expectations around data privacy that you would get with a independent AI service. And I think that sort of duality of what services do you bring, but also what do you have built into the device and the sort of the underlying operating system capabilities, how do you bring those together and make sure you have a consistent governance and data security policies and data protection policies is sort of the new way of evaluating your exposure ultimately, but also making sure that your employees, of course, are productive with the devices that you're deploying.
Yeah, this it's interesting. You both mentioned shadow AI, and this is a concept the three of us have touched on before, and that's certainly an important topic. There's a lot of companies who think they have AI use under control, and then they go off and do a discovery and they find dozens of unsanctioned AI tools that are running through their personal browsers or browser extensions and mobile apps that nobody ever approved. And the tricky part is the employees aren't trying to be malicious, like they're just trying to do their jobs, and they found a tool that helps them do their job. So it's this kind of like governance design problem where saying no doesn't exactly work. People are just going to route around it, but saying yes without controls is how data ends up in places that it shouldn't be. So I mean, maybe we probe a little bit on the controls that really matter. I mean, how do you guys think about, I think some folks think that they put together a great policy document and that's sufficient, but what are some of the controls that enterprises and companies should really think about that move the needle when they're trying to curtail all this stuff?
I think it's interesting to evaluate what is the actual risk to your data that you're looking at rather than the features that you're deploying. In many ways, that's sort of it's still the same analysis and the same way of thinking. It's just the tools are more sophisticated, and you have to look at the risk vectors slightly differently. But ultimately, I mean, we look at how we've designed policy structures for AI tooling. It's not structured around turn off feature X because I don't understand it and I don't like it. It is turn off this type of data access because that type of data access is something that I'm worried about in my organization. Apply that to all features that use that type of data access because that type of data should not be utilized for these kinds of workflows. And I think that abstraction layer above the feature is more resilient. Not only are you getting to the core of the actual problem rather than just sort of responding to what can sometimes be the marketing level of hey, this is an exciting feature or not. But it's also more durable, right? When the platform is designed around the actual data governance rather than the feature management, that means that as features evolve, as products evolve, you're getting that same level of control and understanding of your data flows, irrespective of the latest feature that may interact with that data. right? So if you say, I don't want AI tools to be able to look at the screen of work apps, there's a bunch of different ways that that can happen, and that will continue to happen over time. There will be features that I can't even dream up right now that will interact with the screen on Android devices or Pixel devices to be able to pull that content and do something interesting with it. Maybe that's not good for your use case or your data governance, and that's not something that you have the right tooling and modeling to be able to handle. So managing that at the data level and the access level through the Android platform and through the capabilities that are exposed on Android and Pixel devices is a much more durable way to think about ongoing data privacy and protections, rather than saying, hey, this Gemini intelligence, scary. Let me go decide which one of these features I want to turn on and turn off and go feature by feature.
I think that, to that end, we actually have a white paper that we can make available to your listeners that walks people through some of the ways that, we've thought about it. It really is about going through and saying, as an organization, I'm going to go through and say, yes, you can go through and use a tool like Circle to Search, but no, I'm not going to allow it to extend to work applications on the work profile. Yes, you can use tooling like, Gemini Intelligence, but no, I don't want that to necessarily extend to work profile. I do think, one of the things that we've sort of been guiding customers on is, if you really do want to lean into the kind of more bleeding edge and assistive type experiences that are coming out onto Pixel and onto Android, it may be worthwhile to think about whether or not going into a world of business use only devices for certain personas makes sense. If you're going through and saying, hey, what I really want to do is allow people to drive a more voice driven assistive experience. Right now, the cleanest way to do that is to go through and say, hey, I'm not going to allow for personal apps on this device, predominantly because, in the mixed use world today, a lot of those consumer facing services, point to the primary user of the device, and that is the consumer user on the device. That obviously will go through and migrate over time, but that's sort of where we are right this second. And we're the folks that we see saying, how does a tool like Gemini, not just as an app inside of the work profile, but more as an embedded feature of the operating system tie into my workflow, business use only devices at the moment are the cleanest way to do it. I think the other thing, is to really realize what is the privacy and governance model of the tools that you're selecting. So in the cloud, as an example, because we have gone through and tied a lot of these Gemini experiences to workspace, even in a work profile, if you're using the Gemini app or Gemini on web, that's governed by an enterprise class terms of service. If you're using the on-device tools like MLKit, as an example, and you're processing data locally, that at the platform level is always private. We're never going and using that data for training. The data is never sent back to Google. Whether the data is in a work side of the device or the personal side of the device, it doesn't matter. So this is like a really, Alex, like a long answer to a short question, but I think it's one of those things where you really want to be thinking about exactly what Anne mentioned, which is, what are the problems we're trying to solve? What is the data governance that we're going to go and need to be aware of? How does that flow into the tools I have access to? And how are those tools themselves handling data governance? Then you can sort of start to figure out how this sort of fits into your broader organizational strategy.
Yeah. So I want to stay on maybe work profile here for a minute, since you mentioned it, Sean. I mean, that's been a foundational thing for Android in the enterprise. Can you maybe just explain work profile a little more for our listeners? Where does it still work really well for AI today? And maybe are there any considerations or limitations as AI becomes more and more advanced down the road?
Yeah, I can certainly start off, and Anna, I sure can jump in as well. I think, what work profile is ostensibly running a separate, container of Android on that same physical device. So you literally have a separate instance of the OS basically running in parallel where work applications and work services live. So I can, as an example, have Gmail on the personal side of my device with my personal user on it. And on the separate side of my device and in that work profile, also have Gmail, but it is a separate storage location, separate memory, separate cryptographic keys for all the data that's being handled. And that allows me to go through and ensure reliably that users aren't accidentally sharing data back and forth or selecting the wrong email account or, doing other wonky things with data. And I can also make sure that the user's not grabbing, data outside of a, email and putting it into their consumer file sync and share tool. Where we are seeing, right now with AI is there are lots of ways to go through and drive AI into the work profile, but they really need to be in sort of bounded experiences. And so certainly the Gemini app is one of those ways. The Gemini web experience as well in Chrome is one of those ways. The embedded features inside of Chrome browser that have recently been launched, and we're going to be talking more about in I/O, is the third way of going and providing that kind of containerized experience. Where things get a little bit trickier today is these sort of more embedded assistive functionalities that right now are today pinned against that primary personal user. And so if I look at the long press on the home button and I say, hey, tell me, what's going on in my schedule, what's that next first calendar invite I have, today it is looking for the personal user on that device and the personal, calendar on that device. And it means obviously that those queries are not yet governed by that work account. So that's the guidance we've been sort of giving folks, is to say, if you're leaning into these AI services, make sure that they're embedded within the work profile, or maybe think about going and running business use only devices, depending on the experiences you want to unlock for the user.
Yeah. Ian, any perspective on that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think Sean's highlighted the, where we are today. Maybe to give a sense of where we think we can be tomorrow, I think Sean has actually highlighted by virtue of, hey, what does it mean for embedded services within the work profile? What advantages will that actually give you? And I think this is where, in the same way that business only gives you a clean operating container, where you're not worried about context merge and overload, which is a problem from a data governance perspective, from a privacy perspective, et cetera. Work profile in its most basic form gives you that level of separation, but with the ability to have mixed use devices. And so the sort of North Star and promise here that we're moving towards is where you have the same level of agentic system engagement, but isolated within the work profile. And that sort of like gives a really natural advantage over these mixed context scenarios where your sort of system-wide processes don't have the awareness, especially with the bifurcation of accounts and services that you're going to be using on your device, what's work and what's personal. It doesn't know how to tag it. It doesn't have that context built in. And there's no clean way to process that data independently in a way that still preserves both user privacy and like IT data governance. So having that inherent split in the operating system that then allows us to provide these agentic workflows within each container is actually like sets us up for a really strong foundation in the future where we can mirror those capabilities uniquely within the work profile, have that data across multiple services, multiple accounts, multiple applications already effectively pre-tagged as work. I'll give you a somewhat it's a bad example because this runs entirely on device, but you can imagine what this would look like in the future with notification summaries that came out on Pixel devices in one of our recent Pixel drops. So that's an example of a feature where in the work profile, the notification summaries are generated uniquely in either profile in isolation. If you're on a mixed use device, you're generating notification summaries. Like let's say you're using Outlook for both work and personal, you're getting notification summaries for both work and personal emails being generated in the same process in the same context. Now, again, not really a consideration for this feature because it runs entirely on the device. Nothing's logged, nothing's stored, etc. But you can imagine for those kinds of features where they might have backend connections or where that data needs to be keyed against an identity so that it can go and use more powerful models or more hook into server capabilities, like the calendar lookup that Sean gave a great example for. You can start to see how having that inherent separation built into the platform like skips 10 steps ahead and really enables the sort of clean, isolated and operating environment that's really necessary to supercharge some of these workflows while maintaining ultimately the employee benefit of only having to carry one device.
Yeah, so you both have mentioned this context here is important when you're talking about personal versus professional. I mean, why is context such a hard problem for AI on mobile?
Well, I think it's a problem. It's a hard problem for AI in general. And I think I'll give you an example that I often, share with customers. Um, what's this rash on my arm? Is that a work query or a personal query? Well, it could be a personal query if I'm sitting there with the camera and I'm, in my bedroom late at night and trying to figure out whether or not I need to go to urgent care. It could be a work query if I'm a doctor or if I'm that urgent care provider who's trying to figure out what that course of treatment needs to be. And so, like, from a pure language perspective, what's that rash on my arm is sort of a hard thing to go and evaluate. Am I trying to go through and evaluate this as a work query or a personal query and then provide and generate information on the back of it? Context matters even more, right? Because you then need to go and grab information to go and answer it. So the treatment for that rash, may be a general set of Google searches for the personal user, but might be medical journals for the person who's going and delivering patient care. And it's one of the reasons why you're seeing, we at Google deliver a lot of tools that allow users and organizations to build these these agents and these personas, so you can go through and, kind of deliver the right context and the right data and the right grounding to go and answer the queries on the behalf of the user. So, we're spending a lot of time working with our peers inside of Google Cloud to, bring mobile versions of tools like Gemini Enterprise to be able to go through and say, okay, if I'm building an agent that is designed to respond to customer service tickets and somebody walks into the store and goes like, what's the answer to this question? I'm not going through and running, Gemini and asking against general Google search to answer that. I'm answering that question through the very, defined and cohesive set of enterprise data. So I'm delivering the right answer to that user who's coming into my store or coming into my doctor's office. I'm asking a specific set of questions. So in a lot of ways, context is everything. It's about how you go through and understand, the privacy model. It's about how you understand where you're routing that data to and governing, that particular request. But it's also the data that you're drawing from to make sure you're providing the right sets of information and generating the right information to go and answer the user's query.
Got it. Yeah, that's actually a great example. Ian, anything on that, or otherwise we can move on to the next topic.
I think one other dimension there is like gathering context from the device, because the device has a ton of context as well. And mobile is just so inherently personal that adds another dimension of complexity in making sure that you're gathering the right context for business use versus personal usage, right? Like how the phone's being used is super valuable and impactful context for being able to provide delightful and seemingly magical experiences from a consumer lens. And it appears like both a privacy nightmare and a data governance nightmare for employers if they're collecting it in the wrong ways, right? So I think nothing more to add besides what Sean said. Context is absolutely everything in this scenario, and it's both the operating context, the context in which the user's posing that query, the context in which they grounds the query that they're making, across that entire stack. Like that awareness and making sure all of these pieces line up in the right way is super critical to having like the right outcome for users and the right outcome from a data management perspective.
Got it.
And I think that device context also starts to flow into development as well. And I think one of the things we've introduced, as Android platform in concert with Pixel, is this new tooling called app functions. You'll see some early previews for this talked about at I/O, but you can think about app functions as like a client-side version of a protocol called MCP. And MCP is, basically a protocol that is allowing developers to build a lot of these autonomous agents that you might see if you go to the Home Depot as an example, and you use what they call Magic Apron. There's an agent there at the Home Depot that's backed by Google Cloud that's answering queries about how do I do home repair? What are the types of things I need to do this home repair? It's making product recommendations, et cetera. MCP is one of the ways you tie all that data and allow the agent to understand where to go get it. We're doing this on, like I said, in Android as well. And so, where should I run that kind of query on the server versus running it on the device can be defined by context. I'll give you a really simple consumer example. Show me all of the, interesting restaurants close to my current location. Like, location matters as the context of the device. The server alone, that autonomous agent living inside the Home Depot e-commerce site, has no idea necessarily where you are. It's going to need to grab that device side context to be able to go through and process that query and bring data back to you as the user. Likewise, hey, create me a playlist on YouTube Music for all the top pop songs this year. Like, your device has no idea what the top pop songs are for YouTube Music and has no context of how to answer that query. So you want to go through and run that query not through the client side MCP agent where you're going into a native app to try and look up the data. You're actually going to want to possibly run that back on a server where it can go through and bring that data back for you because it has that broader context from YouTube Music. And this is one of the things where I think it comes back to the earlier conversation of there isn't necessarily a one-size-fits-all approach. Like, if you're building a business workflow to understand trouble tickets, as an example, because you're a field service repair technician, you may be going and doing some of this stuff on device. You may be doing some of this stuff from the server because that's where the context of the data you are working with lives. And also, you may be using on device as a fallback. So, like, okay, I can't process the thousands of pages of service manual because, on the device, because my device doesn't have enough memory. Ian might ship a 96 gig RAM Pixel phone. I don't know what's in his back pocket, but it's not there now. And so I want to go through and, run that query on the server. But if I'm offline, maybe I have really simplified documents that MLKit on the device can go and look at and say, I can answer that question for you in a more limited fashion when you're working offline. And so mixing and matching this, I think, Alex, I think is the name of the game here. You really need to be thinking about how all these tools fit together to answer the business problem that your organization is trying to solve.
That's a great segue into I think our next topic, as you talked about the performance of the device itself, and is it capable of running some of the workflows that I needed to run. And that's certainly an area that we deal with a lot, which is procurement here at Stratix. And I think procurement decisions are a lot more complicated today than maybe they were a couple of years ago. A few years ago, devices were perfectly fine for email or browser or just general lines of business applications. But AI fundamentally changes that math because the device you buy today is going to determine what AI capabilities you can run on it for the next 3 years. So I wanted to pose that question of how does AI change what enterprise ready actually means in device procurement, and how is that different from how organizations made these decisions 2 or even 3 or even 2 years ago?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, and I think it's even more complicated or higher stakes than you've positioned, because not only do you have the sort of the consideration of the moving trajectory of AI capabilities and what you expect to be, what should you expect to be running on device in 2 years' time. But 2 years is actually probably the wrong time frame to be considering, because device longevity is better than it ever has been. And especially as there's uncertainty around supply chains, we're seeing organizations considering, what is the actual lifespan of these devices that I want to realize. So now you're looking at a longer term investment period. I mean, I don't know what the state of the AI landscape will look like in 6 months. I certainly don't know it in 4 years. So tremendous empathy for decision makers here. I think it's about considering how much headroom can you build into your fleet, and thinking of the device as an asset in the same way that you would a server, right? We've already seen tremendous improvements in on-device capabilities, and that's not just limited to the latest silicon, right? Pixel in particular, not to do too much of a plug, but we have a strong legacy here of our custom silicon that's optimized for these on-device AI workflows. And so you can look at the performance of these devices even from a couple of years back. As the advancements in models and capabilities increase, those older devices are still holding pace with those advancements. Maybe not all of them, maybe not the cutting edge in every case, but you're definitely seeing how you can get multiple years of value, increasing value, in fact, out of a more capable device. So I think there's a really strong argument to think about your mobile procurement as more than just a presentation layer for email, calendar, and chat.
Yep.
And
I think that headroom part is so important, because I think the challenge that we're seeing is that, I mentioned RAM only somewhat jokingly. Like these models can take quite a bit of memory. And so if your benchmark was, a mid-tier or low-tier device, on Android that you were planning on keeping in service for 3 to 5 years, the good news, I think, and you sort of alluded to this, like the good news is that at least on the Android front, we are seeing OS longevity lengthen quite a bit, even on those lower tier devices. But the challenge is going to be whether or not you added enough hardware headroom to be able to leverage the newest on-device services as those come out. And that may mean buying devices that are, flagship, what we consider flagship devices, your Pixel 10 series type of device, rather than that lower price point, lower RAM device, simply because that's what you're going to need to be able to keep a device in service longer. And I think there's a model that we can likely draw here from laptops. Like, I think a lot of organizations weren't, putting in the $300 budget laptop that you could buy at a consumer electronics retailer and going, that laptop's going to last me for 5 years in service. It'll be wonderful. Like, no, I don't think we think about that in traditional computing. I think to Ian's point, like, we have thought about that way for mobile, because mobile was more of a thin client for email. But because now these devices are running ultimately as a compute workload inside of your organization, and that processing and that execution is now happening increasingly in concert with the cloud, but it's the cloud and the device together, you may now need to be looking at that higher performant device that you're planning on keeping in service longer in the same way that you do laptops. Now, one of the things I think that's interesting from a procurement perspective, and we just brought this out in Android and shipping first on Pixel, is new tooling around Android desktop mode. So if you do need to go and have that kind of more desktop-like form factor, and you're now wondering, well, what's my procurement trade-off of a laptop, but also this now more expensive phone that I need to think about, you can actually, for certain personas inside of the organization, just go and use the mobile device, because when you dock the mobile device against a USB-C connection to a monitor and a keyboard and a mouse, all of a sudden we're taking that Android device and we're flexing it into a desktop environment that the user might be able to go and do, be able to do more desktop intensive type applications like data entry, like, being able to monitor large data sets because I want that extra screen real estate. So there's a lot of interesting things at the high end side of devices that you can do because you're adding that additional device capability.
So maybe without getting too deep into the spec sheet, is there a floor that enterprise buyers should be holding the line on right now about just what the minimum requirements may need to be to run some of these more advanced workflows?
I think what we're seeing now across the industry is that, the on-device AI services are running best on the flagship devices. So that, that's devices like your Pixel 10, that's like the Samsung S series rather than some of the lower tier devices. And that's because those devices are bringing the extra memory and the extra more optimized silicon to be able to go through and support, pure on-device AI workloads. You may be able to get away with certain things on, like the Pixel 10 or Pixel A series devices, because we've optimized some of the models to run on that lower memory footprint. But I do think if I were trying to go and set a floor, the higher end devices are certainly going to last in service longer with these AI workloads than some of the mid tier. But again, I don't know how you're thinking about it on the Pixel side.
Yeah, I mean, not to come off as giving the hard sell, but I might flip the model on its head. Instead of thinking about a floor, I would be thinking about what's the most that you can flex for right now, given the uncertainty. Nobody knows where we're going to be ending up in a few years, and so the more you have to play with, I think the better position you'll be to make the right decision at the right time.
Yeah. And I'm wondering, is there a governance connection here as you think about procurement, which is kind of connecting back to where we started this whole conversation? If you procure devices that aren't able to support secure on-device AI, you may have made a governance decision, whether you realize it or not, by forcing things into the cloud or the server side, or forcing employees to find workarounds. Does that resonate with you guys?
Potentially. I mean, I think from our perspective, and this is so central to that full stack AI narrative. Like if you're coming to Google for that AI service, whether that's built into your Pixel device all the way to Google Cloud, you should have the same expectation of enterprise data protections and data governance across that stack. Now, if you don't have the capabilities on your device and that creates a productivity gap, that might be the downside on that conversation. And then those productivity gaps, that's what invites shadow AI and creates the sort of governance challenges that we were highlighting.
Yeah, and I think that productivity gap is real, because when I talk to a lot of the software partners that Stratix's customers rely on, I hear again and again that we want to do this AI stuff, but we have to be able to run certain workloads on device because of offline and reliability. Like, you can't go through and just say, well, I lost my connection to the cloud, I guess I'm not working on that trouble ticket today. Like, that doesn't fly when you're talking about trying to go and get work done in the field. And if you're, relying on AI because you're trying to take your lowest skilled tech and make them as efficient and productive as the person who's been working on that same, in that same organization for 5, 10, 15 years, using AI to augment human performance, but having that performance go down because all of a sudden the connectivity went out or their latency goes up, it just doesn't work. And so really this comes back to less about governance, because obviously, to Ian's point, we're building all the services and data protections, for, through AI with all the, business class services that Google delivers, like Workspace, like Gemini Enterprise. It's less the governance problem. Yes, you can solve for it all in the cloud. It's more about what is the SLA you're trying to set as an organization? What's the productivity outcomes you're expecting as an organization when you're deploying that mobile device to the user using these new AI services?
Got it. Makes sense. All right. So last topic here before I hit you guys with some rapid fire questions. AI certainly showing up in places that sometimes the user may not even know. It's a concept we talked about a little bit earlier. It's built into the OS, it's built into apps, the SDKs, the AI features that are showing up in tools we already use. So how should enterprises be thinking about trust and governance across first-party AI, like what's built into the device itself, versus third-party AI, what's coming in through the application layer?
Well, I think certainly from a first-party perspective, this kind of comes back to the identity model conversation we had earlier, where if you're logging in with a business account through Workspace, through Gemini Enterprise, we're bringing all of the governance and security down to the device and into those services. So I think as long as you are doing that with eyes wide open, we're solving for a lot of governance and security along the way. I think that the bigger challenge that you're sort of prompting on is like, but what if I have another software supplier that's using another service? And so certainly we do encourage organizations to be talking to who their suppliers are and asking about what services they're bringing and how do they think about AI, inside of that other application. And then obviously the big thing comes down here is really around user training. Most users want to do the right thing. Most users are, those 45% of folks that are saying, I, lost IP or sensitive data to a consumer grade AI tool. I sincerely doubt that those people were trying to be malicious. It's that they were just really comfortable with a tool they've been using to also plan trips to Japan or find the best restaurant for a birthday party. I know how to do my personal tasks with this AI. I'll do that also with, for my business outcomes as well. And so ultimately training people on the appropriate use, what services have you made available as an organization to, so the user can run fast with AI is super duper important. And there's certainly things that we've been, here at Google, been going and providing resourcing around as well.
That's great. I think we're ready for our rapid fire round here. So we've done this several times before. Short answers. First thing that comes to mind. No overthinking. Why don't we go Ian first and then Sean? And if you guys have the same thought, that's okay. You can repeat answers. Y'all ready?
Let's go for it. All right.
All right. Number one AI governance mistake enterprises make.
I'm going to call back to our previous point, focusing on features, not data. Make sure you're focused on your data risks, not the type of feature that you're deploying.
I'm going to say understanding the business outcomes you're trying to achieve. I think a lot of organizational leaders have said, we're going to do stuff with AI, and the amount of AI consumption ends up being the metric, not the business outcomes you're trying to achieve. That obviously is not great for your procurement or CFO teams necessarily, but it's also one of the things we see. There have been lots of studies saying, a lot of AI projects are failing. And it's, I think, in part because of this mismatch of what are the tools capable of versus the business outcomes you're trying to achieve.
Love it. Number two, one device AI capability that matters more than people expect, or maybe one of your favorite capabilities.
This one's easy for me. I've been saying this for years now, and I will continue to say it. Speech to text. We are quite proud of our speech to text capabilities on Pixel and Android, and they continue to get better. You'll see the Rambler announcement as part of Gemini Intelligence is just going to make that so much more intuitive and easy. If I had it for this interview, it would cut out all the uhs, ums, and this, that's, the others, making me sound way more professional than I am. It's a way of interacting with your device that's just so organic and authentic and meets that mobile productivity goal statement just so organically. I think it continues to be a place where I don't see enough organizations taking advantage of those built-in speech to text capabilities.
Yeah, I have to agree with Ian. Voice is definitely a modality that's been underlooked and underappreciated. And certainly, I think as we look at, newer form factors like Android XR, if we look at a lot of the personas that your organizations at Stratix are likely, servicing, where I'm having to go work with my hands, but I'm also trying to go through and do, interact with digital data, that voice modality. I just even think about things like updating a trouble ticket. Did you do the work? And so many times I've been with customers and like the trouble ticket data is terrible because the person at the end of the day is just trying to get to the next field and puts, did you do the work? What was the outcome? Yes. Like that problem that you run into there, if we kind of tie that back to AI, is like you don't have the learnings that came from the on the ground human interaction with the process to be able to go through and get intelligent insights of like even basics, like how long did it take to do a thing? And so I think if you can make it easier for people to bring that data back to the system of record, that I think ends up being really, really powerful in driving organizational value inside the org. So yeah, voice, speech to text, both, audio output and audio input, hugely overlooked.
One misconception about AI at the edge.
I think there's a lot of people that look at AI in general as this like magical box that can solve every problem. And when you go through and do that at the edge, it becomes even more resource constrained. And it's less about, everybody I think gets concerned about hallucinations and data accuracy. And they're getting less concerned, I think, as the AIs themselves have gotten better. But there's sometimes missing opportunities to go through and think about, the amount of value that can be gotten out of even a constrained model that can run on the edge. And what they'll do is they'll say, well, I did it inside Gemini in my web browser and it worked, and it doesn't work on the device. So thus the device way of doing it must fail. And I think that's not necessarily the way to look at it. And we talked about this a little bit earlier. Like if you can go through and have your model, be able to go through and summarize a work ticket. So it is more, I can go through and ramble on about the work I did and that gets posted back to my system of record as an elegant and readable set of information that's valuable for the next person trying to work in service to that customer. That can be done on device today and, then brought to the server later. And so I think there's a lot of value we can see. I think there's lots of interesting stuff happening around a technology called retrieval augmented generation, basically being able to summarize and synthesize data, and being able to ask questions about documents. I think depending on the complexity of the document, you can even run some of that on the device. So lots of really cool stuff, but you really need to be thinking about what the constraints are of that device and then how to apply some business outcomes that you can get from it.
I think I basically have the same answer, but maybe I'll put it slightly differently. I think the biggest misconception I see is people either vastly overestimating or vastly underestimating on-device capabilities. And it really does go in both directions. Frankly, it's quite hard to pin down, right? Again, like anything, the state of progress here is tremendous. But you talk to some folks and they immediately discount on-device and think that the pace of innovation in cloud is the way to go. And I don't need to worry about device. I'm always going to have cloud. It's going to, the cost is going to diminish entirely. And this is just where I'm going to do things. And then you have, advocates on the other side who say, I'm never going to have a cloud bill because my device is always going to be able to do both. I think checking in routinely, really stress testing what you can accomplish on the device, being thoughtful and creative about how you structure those workloads. I think folks will find that there is lots that they can do, but they will also find what things are better suited for the cloud as well. And again, it all just goes back to use case like we were discussing. I think that's the core consideration when you're deciding where to go. But really, just misestimating what the device actually can do.
I think the other thing that people, and I think, Ian, that's a really great point about pace of change. I think what people underestimate how quickly this industry is moving. And one of the things I think organizations can do a better job is giving people the time to keep up to date with what's going on in the industry. And that doesn't necessarily mean like just let's run lots more hackathons. It's just giving people the space to say, I'm going to read that white paper. I'm going to attend that webinar. I'm going to go through and read that case study to figure, we're all figuring this out together as an industry. And one of the things I've been really enjoying about the AI industry is how transparent a lot of organizations are being about, what are they seeing with, model behavior? What are they seeing about capabilities? And certainly, Google and DeepMind, have been contributing quite a bit toward what that state of the art is. And so I would definitely, be encouraging your IT leaders to really be less on the hackathon side, although I think that's really important because that helps you understand what's art of the possible today, but also really going into sort of, what's possible on the horizon so you know how to prepare for it.
Yeah. All right, last one. Oh, sorry, Ian, go ahead.
Sorry, just to jump on that, like when the cost of re-implementing a workflow and trying it in a new way with a new tool is so low, you really should be taking that next time you have to go through that workflow as your opportunity to try and rebuild, re-optimize, try out the latest tools, right? Every time you don't do that is an opportunity lost to try and up-level your engagement to accelerate that workflow with whatever you have at your disposal.
Yep. All right, last one. What one consideration that leaders should start to add to procurement decisions and discussions now?
So, I think this is less of a procurement question that people are running into. I think certainly the real opportunity that I see is an opportunity for those IT leaders to go back and say, the folks that are on the front line, the folks that are running the business, not how do I use AI to solve your problem, but what problems are you having right now? What are the friction points that you're going through and running into in doing work on the ground with or without digital technology? You heard Ian and I get really excited about voice. I think it's because we keep hearing the same pain points over and over again about, it's just really hard to work in a system and I'm trying to get my job done. And every time you ask me to form fill something, it's work that I'm not doing in the field, doing the thing I actually enjoy, whether that's, working with my hands to build something or treating a patient or something else. And so I think if you can go through and really sit down with those folks who are running the process, don't go through and start and say, hey, I built this wonderful digital system. It can do all these amazing things. And you're a logistics organization. And some shift manager goes, do you understand that we wear gloves? We can't type all the things that you now wanted us to type. And that's not a hypothetical. Like I've heard this firsthand. And so I think going through and saying like, Les, I built the digital thing for you. I applied some AI to your workflow. Like that really sets a lot of fatigue off, especially for people who are not necessarily in the AI world or in the technology sector. But if you can come through and say, hey, I think I hear your problem and I think this can make you 15% more efficient and let you get home to your, family more easily, or let you spend more time, working with somebody, more closely and less time going and filing data, that ends up being a massive win. And then you can start to go work with procurement on how you budget for that problem. Hey, I hear this friction's out there. I think we can go and solve it to make them 10% more efficient, 10% more productive, improve customer CSAT, a certain way. And then you can figure out, whether that ROI is there and how to go and execute against it.
That certainly is real. Ian, anything?
Yeah, I'd say, I think we're seeing a shift, or maybe it's just an evolution of what's always been there, but for the device and the operating system to bring something to the table that isn't just enabling the software and workflows that you could already do on other platforms, or just bringing it to another form factor, right? I think what you're seeing with something like Gemini Intelligence is a rethink of the operating system and how it bridges those silos of different applications and discrete workflows, and actually does add a new layer of interaction and a new layer of productivity capabilities to that experience that just isn't there without that device, that operating system providing those capabilities. So I think there's a new way of looking at your provider, your hardware provider, not just about specs, not just about ID and like robustness of hardware, and not just about, is it compatible with the software that I need to run? Is it intuitive from a user experience perspective? But a new set of capabilities that, whether you see that as an evolution or a step function from what operating systems and built-in device capabilities have done, I think functionally, it doesn't matter. At the end of the day, we are seeing new types of capabilities that will make people more productive and more effective with their devices. And you should think about, what is it that I get with any given device, any given operating system, and what is the future of those capabilities for those devices?
One final thing I might leave you with is think with a broader mind about form factor. I think a lot of people have said, well, that's a laptop problem or that's a phone problem. And I think you're hearing Ian and I talk about just new ways of kind of reimagining the digital data, interacting with that digital data. When you think about procurement, ask yourself, hey, if we've always used laptops in a truck to solve this problem, could a much better phone and something like Android desktop mode solve my laptop problem and my field service problem at the same time? If voice is a thing we need to think about, do I need to be adding a set of noise canceling headphones to allow somebody to go through and work, or a headset with a boom mic to be able to work vocally with that digital data? Does something like an XR headset, and we're going to have some really fun announcements over the next several months in that space with the release of Android XR earlier this year, does that help my folks go and interact with digital data, or do better training, or do other activities that traditional form factors haven't necessarily been able to do historically? None of this is a right answer. There's not necessarily a one size fits all answer for this either. But the really exciting thing about Android right now is that we're building this AI, operating system as really a compute platform. It's not, I build for phone, I build for tablet. It's really, I'm going to build an application and a business process I'm going to have continuity with AI that's grounded against a work account with Workspace. And I can go through and flex that experience and really have the application meet the user where they are with the right amount of data and process that they need to go and be productive at that moment. I'm not having to hop between a tablet and then over to a PC and then over to something else. In some cases, that experience might be driven all from the same device. In some cases, it might be a couple of different devices, but I have that continuity across screens. And that's all stuff that we are super duper excited about here at Google.
This was great. Great job, guys. We covered a lot of ground today. And I think your perspectives, certainly in the Android and the Pixel for Business side, were super helpful. I'm really glad you guys were here. Thank you both for taking the time with me.
Thank you, Alex.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Alex. Cheers.
Thanks for listening to this Stratix podcast. If you liked what you heard today, please share it and visit stratixcorp.com/podcast to subscribe so you never miss an episode.